Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today, we'll be exploring what is known as psychic surgery in the Philippines. With me is Dr. James McClenon, a sociologist, also a licensed clinical social worker. He is the author of 4 books, including Deviant Science, The Case of Parapsychology, Wondrous Events, Foundations of Religious Belief, Wondrous Healing, Shamanism, Human Evolution, and the Origin of Religion, and The Entity Letters, a sociologist on the trail of a supernatural mystery. Once again, I'm conducting this interview via Skype, so now I'm going to switch over to the Skype video. Welcome, Jim. It's a pleasure to be with you once again. I know we've had a couple of discussions already on some very remarkable phenomenon, and I guess it's fair to say right at the outset that when it comes to psychic surgery, you tend to be more skeptical than you would be or than you were with regard to either the Surrat group or firewalking.
Well, I had hung out for the Surrats for a number of years, and I had developed the opinion that Psi had a kind of hiding quality. And then I got a chance. I had some very powerful experiences, and there was a probability or possibility of fraud, but a lot of times that was kind of alleviated. Like everyone would have their hands on the table and it would move around, and it would look like, say, Tom Richards is pushing it, but then he'd take his hands away and it would still be moving around. So I got this job in Asia. I was working for the University of Maryland with the Asia division, and I got a chance to go to the Philippines in 1982, then again in 1983, then 1984, then 1985. So I had a great deal of opportunity to look at psychic surgery, and so and my job as a sociologist is to see what's going on and interview people and take notes. And so that's what I was doing. And I had the expectation that there'd be something paranormal involved because it was such an ambiguous situation.
Mm-hmm. You witnessed, as I recall, over 1,000 psychic surgeries in the Philippines.
Yes, and I didn't really know what to expect. I remember the very first one I saw. It looks pretty strange, but it didn't look like a surgery. And I was kind of puzzled because if there's one thing that I had learned, is that Psi has a kind of hiding quality. I think psychokinesis is real, but it has a kind of hiding quality. And here you could just go, you could attend like a service, and here they were kind of fiddling around and blood would come out. And so it was puzzling. So I started reading up and looking at the history of psychic surgery, and it's not something which is centuries-old practice. It's something that it started in the Philippines after World War II, and the Filipino people had been exposed to. They had a greater chance to see real surgeries, and they have a tradition of sleight of hand shamanism. They have certain kinds of practitioners, like one is called a bula bula, and he'll take a cup and put it over, say, some infirm part of your body, and then blow through a tube into the cup, and the water becomes cloudy. And it's as if the evil is being extracted from the infection. And then inside the cup, they'll find a bone, and it's got some magical carvings on it. And then he'll blow into the cup again, and the water will become clear. And so this is the kind of magic that they did, and it had become part of a lot of people's Christian practice. It had been a part of indigenous Filipino sorcery, and then now it was done in the Christian context. And there were also kind of spiritualist groups north of Manila. Now, it's not a prevalent practice, but it's something that people north of Manila were familiar with. And so after World War II, they began doing this kind of psychic surgery thing, and then that was discovered in the 1960s. I think Harold Sherman wrote a book, Wonder Healers of the Philippines, published in 1967, and that was somewhat of a bestseller. And so tourists started going, and they were impressed by this. And so that's what I was looking at. And I had a book which listed all the most famous psychic surgeons, and I made a point. I visited every single one of them. I hung out in their compounds. I interviewed them. I got their biographies, and I watched surgery after surgery after surgery. And I just wanted to see what it was like.
Now, isn't it the case that shamans use trickery in healing, not just in the Philippines, but it's pretty universal, North America and Asia, yes, and other countries? I think the idea of fooling people into thinking they've been healed helps to engender a state of consciousness which is perhaps conducive to healing.
Well, I think there's certain points. I've got like 3 points I want to get across. Like the first is the idea that I think that psychokinesis is real, but it hides. Okay, and then the second point is that I think Shakespeare said the play's the thing. It's the performance. The performance has an impact on the audience. And Shakespeare said, we're going to put on this play, and it's going to have an effect on the king in the play Hamlet. And so that's kind of what shamanism. You put on a performance, and it has an effect on the audience. And the idea is it's going to have a hypnotic and a placebo effect on the audience. They're going to benefit from this. So that's what they were doing in the Philippines during that era. And I was going around and interviewing, and I was wondering if there were common features all over the world. I got a chance to go to Thailand, Philippines, Korea, Sri Lanka, India, People's Republic of China, Taiwan, Okinawa. I got a chance to go to a lot of different places. So I was collecting these narratives, interviewing people, watching, and I was wondering what's the commonality here. And there's a lot of academic researchers say that there isn't any real commonality. This is just a collection of local cultural phenomena. But I was thinking there probably is. My friend Michael Winkelmann felt certain that there's a physiological basis for shamanism. So I collected all these stories, and so I thought I'd just share some of them while we talk, and you'll see there are common elements in this.
Across the world, not just in the Philippines, you mean?
Yes, but we'll focus on the Philippines right now. That's our topic for today.
Well, psychic surgery has also been reported in Brazil. I know that.
Yes, but it's a little bit different. I think Brazil and the Philippines are similar in that there's a culture of powerful belief in both places, and also a belief in spirits. In the Philippines, they have a lot of sorcerers, so they have this powerful belief in spirits, and there's similarities in that there's similarities between the sleight of hand performance. There's commonalities because there's a way you can perform this by sleight of hand, and there's a lot of skeptical literature. James Randi's done videotapes where he simulates psychic surgery. There's been a lot of skeptics who investigated, and they feel pretty certain that it's all sleight of hand. And so that was the kind of thing I was thrown into. Yeah. And so I would interview the shamans. I was wondering, is there similarities to the way a person becomes a healer? And there are. For example, Alex Orbito. I talked to him, and he told me about when he was 14 years old, a neighborhood woman had a dream in which he came to her and that healed her. She had been paralyzed. She was in a wheelchair for the last 10 years. And so the neighbors all wanted him to come visit her, and he did. And then she was able to walk. And he got this reputation as a healer. That was the beginning of his reputation. He started having recurring dreams, some of which had an extrasensory component, and so that enhanced his reputation. But there, in those days, the payment for doing a psychic surgery was like 1 peso. There wasn't really much of a reward, and so he wanted to become just a regular guy, and pretty much I think he might have gone to Manila or some large city and was just doing some menial job, and started getting sick and having voices in his head telling him that he had to heal. And he was working for a photography studio, and he was accused of stealing equipment and was in jail, and the voices became more and more intense. And so he agreed he would, this agreement with the voices, okay, I'll be a healer. They let him out of jail, and he still tried resisting, but the sickness kept getting worse and worse, and here he was back at home. And I think there's different variations to the story, but I think he healed his mother, or some other people were healed. And so this launched his career as a psychic surgeon.
Now, is this a typical story? Is that what you're claiming? That
yes.
Throughout the world, I mean, dreams lead people to have careers as healers or as mystics of one kind or another.
Well, in 1986, I had about 3 dozen of different people who I had collected stories from, and I was thinking to myself, what's the pattern? I had page after page of interview notes, and I hadn't, it wasn't really that apparent to me at the time. In 1986, I looked through all these stories, and that was the pattern. Spontaneous, anomalous experiences.
Mm-hmm.
They have a compelling element, and that the person requires. These are people that have a lot of experiences, and they develop a reputation in their community, and they often become ill, and the way to recovery is to become a healer.
Mm-hmm.
So that was just a recurring feature.
I mean, that's why shamans are called the wounded healers.
Yes, yeah. There's that syndrome, the wounded healer syndrome. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So it sounds like what you're saying here is that Alex Orbido, for one, was very sincere in his endeavor to heal people.
Horribly sincere. Yes, but surrounded by a whole community of people who were helping him. Mm-hmm. And so I was kind of curious about it. It seemed to me that a lot of times when I was talking to him, he was in trance just in everyday life, that he had gone into the trance state. And it seemed that's kind of that. I guess that was kind of a self-healing mechanism. And over the years, I've developed a theory that this type of thing is related to dissociation and absorption, the focusing of the mind, being able to dissociate the mind and being able to focus the mind. And these are the 2 elements that make for hypnosis.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a hypnotic quality, a kind of self-hypnotic quality.
And I suppose an important question to ask is whether or not people are legitimately receiving some form of practical healing.
Well, that is an issue, isn't it? Because there's all kinds of Alex Orbido has been arrested. Or they've tried to arrest him in different countries, and
because he travels,
he's been all over the world. He has probably healed done these surgeries for about 1 million people.
I've met him. I've observed his surgeries in the Philippines. As a matter of fact,
and others also. There's a collection of maybe about 1 dozen people, and they're very famous, and they attract a lot of following. Mm-hmm. So I'd be talking to these people, and almost all of them tell me, that almost everyone else except for maybe 3 people are frauds. They tell me, every single one of them. So I don't remember whether he told me that, but it would be something that he might say. Like they're saying everyone else is fraudulent, but I'm not.
So it's commonly understood that there's a certain amount of fraud going on.
It's expected. I mean, it's part of the culture. People expect it.
Well, that's interesting, because if people are healed because of a placebo effect or because of something having to do with their belief system, then if they also think it's fraud, that's kind of paradoxical, isn't it?
Well, the people who are healed do not think it's fraud. They're compelled to believe, you see. Yeah. And now, according to my theory, these are people who have a tendency to be dissociative and absorptive. They're good hypnotic subjects. Mm-hmm. So there's a certain kind of person who's healed, and that person believes in it. They're compelled to believe in it. Mm-hmm. And it is I have trouble framing this in my own mind. How is it that people do that? And how can they be surrounded by people who are working with them? What are their belief systems? So I'm traveling around, I'm talking to people like Josephina Sisson. I decided I would, after I interviewed all these famous surgeons, I started going into the backcountry to people who are more difficult to locate and don't have so much tourist traffic. And Josephina was one of these people. She was in backcountry, and she was doing these surgeries every week and having, many, many Filipinos were coming to see her. And so I asked her, how did you start doing this? And she told me that she had been compelled, had the calling, and was taking herself on these major pilgrimages and encountered a saintly man in a white clothing, and he taught her how to do this mind cleaning operation. Mm. And so she would take a piece of cotton, she'd put it in a person's right ear, and take it out of their left ear.
That's a good trick.
Clean their mind. Yeah. And would do it again and again. Mm-hmm. And so I can't see how they're doing it. I believe in psychokinesis, but I'm watching surgery after surgery, and they're all similar. They're all could be sleight of hand, and she's surrounded by all this entourage. Her family's helping her do this. What's going on? And then I was teaching classes for military personnel. I invited some of my students to come with me, and I had this sergeant who was kind of taking me under the wing, like I had been in the Army and been a lieutenant. Sergeants, a lot of times they kind of take care of you and help you. So he looked at us. I said, Sergeant, is that sleight of hand? And he said, Lieutenant, that's got to be sleight of hand, and something kind of clicked in my mind. And from then on, I could see how it's done. I could see, if you looked closely between her fingers, you could see a tiny little piece when she took it out. Mm-hmm. She put it in, and then there would be, it actually was balled up between her fingers. Mm-hmm. And then your hand's concealed, you can't see it, and it takes out. And I could see it with all of them. Every time I looked at it from then on, I could see it's possible to load your hands up. You pull the stuff out. It was just so very, very clear.
Now, I believe you told me earlier that you had consulted with James Randi, the magician debunker, and he showed you some of the methods they use.
Yes, I did have contact with James Randi, and I watched the videos of him doing psychic surgery, and he also showed me how to do metal bending. We had a very extensive conversation, and it was very valuable for me, but at the same time, I was kind of misled by it because I had the opinion that I knew more than I actually did. So when I went to look at the psychic surgeons, it didn't actually look that similar to what Randi was doing. Their motions were much more fluid, and it was a little bit startling, and it wasn't the same kind of phenomena. So I would assume, okay, then there's of course the second question is, how effective is this? How powerful is the placebo effect? In other words, mm-hmm. And so I would interview a lot of people who were having the surgeries done, and they were the Westerners were very thrilled. They paid a lot of money. They were having a religious experience, and I got a lot of their names. They flew home, and I would say 1/3 of them were a little bit skeptical. 1/3 of them felt it was a wonderful time, but it didn't seem to make any difference, and 1/3 of them died.
Oh,
so yeah, it's a serious thing. There's a lot of people who have terminal illnesses, and so there's that. And then if you look in the literature, there's if you really monitor it closely, there's whole plane loads of people going there, and sometimes the entire plane load experiences no benefit whatsoever. Mm-hmm. So and then as I was watching surgeons, I was hanging out with the audience. And it's a kind of brutal world. I remember this one practitioner. She had suddenly become famous. She suddenly had done a psychic surgery and removed a bullet from a bullet wound. And this had gotten a lot of media attention, and she was attracting a huge crowds. And she didn't, I remember waiting afternoon for hour after hour with all these people, and she couldn't seem to do more than one surgery in every hour. And so all these people were not going to get any healing, and they were crippled children and people with terminal illnesses. And the world of psychic surgery has an underbelly, which is pretty harsh. There's a lot of people who don't benefit from it. But my impression is that they think that they do anyway. And so I decided I would have a surgery just to get the experience. And I did it with Alex Orbito. And he asked me what my problem was. And I felt like I was in pretty good health. But I told him I was tired because I was spending a lot of time. It takes a lot of travel. It's very hot. It's difficult. So I said, I'm tired. He says, well, then you probably need a heart surgery. So I have a picture in my book. There's a picture of me and he's rooting around. The blood's coming out of my chest, and he's doing a heart surgery. And it was pretty thrilling. I remember coming home and feeling it's kind of like jumping out of an airplane or something. It's a marvelous experience, even though it is done through sleight of hand, in my opinion.
Yeah. So you did some studies to determine, as I recall, the hypnotic susceptibility of the people involved in all of this.
I participated in skeptical organizations for a while, and I remember one afternoon I had a meeting at my house, and I had all these skeptics, and I did a hypnosis experiment with them, and they turned out to be very resistant.
Yeah.
They were difficult to hypnotize. Our artists and actors are easy to hypnotize, I've found. And so I think shamans in the same way. But the shamans are on another wavelength, and it's superficial to attribute everything to hypnosis. They are interacting with themselves. They're interacting. Like one thing I noticed in all these stories that I collected, I'm a sociologist, so I was of the opinion that this would require some kind of socialization process. You need to hang out with other people, learn how to do it, and you're socialized into the role. But the stories they told me didn't fit that very well. People would tell me stories that they had hearing voices in their head. They had been resistant. They got sicker and sicker. Then they had begun doing healings. The medical problem had gone away, and the voices and the spirit inside of them would tell them how to do it. Actually put together the ritual for them. So it's like a self-socialization process, an inner process of responding. I remember one shamanic practitioner saying, you have to make a vow with the spirits. And once you do that, then they'll protect you, and you can then do healings. So it's a kind of a strange inner process. So we have this idea of PK is real, but it's hiding, and then there's this performance, and then that results in the psychosomatic healing, but the actual paranormal part of it's hiding, and it's not something that's going to be, you're going to see it. You're not going to pay a fee and then see somebody perform like that. It just doesn't seem like it works that way.
Now, I know you've talked to some people who felt they were healed very dramatically, say from cancer.
Oh yeah, when I hung out with a lot of people, and people would come and say, yes, I had been diagnosed with such and such a type of cancer, and I have all my medical records, and the doctors can't understand it or they can't explain it, and it was, the whole experience was a bit overwhelming, and I realized I had come to realize that I could pursue it, I could try to verify it, but it isn't going to work out. It isn't going to be anything that would convince a skeptic, because the doctors could have misdiagnosed the cancer. I mean, this is a universal thing, and you're dealing with something that's kind of a cross-cultural phenomena. When I was there were people coming from Pakistan, from India, from Iran, from a lot of foreign countries, and they were being healed by the psychic surgeons. And we're dealing with really a strange kind of cross-cultural interaction. I remember listening to some very, very strange interaction where the the lady from Pakistan, she was trying to bargain down the price because, everything should be bargained. She's trying to get the price lower to the healer saying, well, you need to believe in Jesus. That's the power of this. And she said, well, I don't believe in Jesus, but I want 2 surgeries for the price of 1, Oh, no, it doesn't work like that, And, I remember sitting in on Alex Orbito. He has a people preach before he comes on, and they're trying to explain to the audience that Jesus never said, there's no place in the Bible where Jesus says, I will heal you. Jesus never says that he will heal anybody. And it's the same with Alex Orbito. He never says, I will heal you. Jesus said, by your faith are ye healed. Your faith will heal you. And so I got the impression maybe on some level they were aware that this was a show, that the show was a thing. It's kind of it's hard to imagine what it's like to be a surgeon and not fully believe in what you're doing.
Yeah.
So I think they were. I think that Alex Orbito, if you gave him a lie detector test, he would easily pass it. He'd pass it without a problem.
You described him earlier as horribly sincere.
Yes, yeah, because you're watching a performance that, to my mind, is obviously sleight of hand, but yet they sing hymns. They're all holding the Bible. It's a deeply religious atmosphere. I remember one time I was with my ex-wife at the time, and it was a really hot day. We were in Alex Orbito's place, and there was some kind of delay, and there was like 45 minutes, and all these people were gathered, and it's a hard environment, a lot of illness and suffering, and you wish, let's get this over with, like it was really rough. And she says, well, let's just go around back. Let's get away from this. So we go around the back of the house, and I say, well, I think what's probably happening is that the chicken guts haven't arrived yet, And she says, yeah, that's probably the problem. They're waiting for the chicken guts. And sure enough, this guy comes in the back door. He's carrying this big tray of chicken guts. He goes into the back of the house. And we said, well, we better get around the front because they're going to start the show in a second. And sure enough, 15 minutes later, there's the tray, and the chicken guts, or I don't know that they're actually in there, but there's all these towels wrapped up. And then the towels are part of the performance. You pick up the towel, you wipe your hands then does the operation, and on to the next one, and pulling out all these, what looks like chicken guts, one after another. So I was going more and more into the backcountry to get an understanding of the cultural roots of the phenomena, and I attended a number of church services of the kind of place where the surgeons were coming from. The psychic surgeons came from these communities, and I saw people doing symbolic surgeries. There's no chicken guts. They're just going into trance, and the people are gathering, and they're just waving their hands around, and it's more like a Pentecostal service. There's a sincerity to it and an authenticity. And I noticed that young people, there's teenagers, and just like Alex Orbito, and he was a teenager, and so you could see how there's kind of like a training ground. People are very, very poor. It's kind of like a musician. Many musicians are very, very poor, but some of them become fabulously wealthy. So maybe a dozen people will become fabulously wealthy, and I encountered many people who wanted to become psychic surgeons, but they hadn't hit the big time. They were floundering and didn't have followers.
Now, I have talked to a couple of Westerners who have participated in psychic surgery, and even one person who claimed he was trained as a psychic surgeon, and he believed it was quite authentic.
Now, I've looked into that. I talked to you previously, and you gave me a name of a guy.
Doug Volks.
Yeah, Doug Volks. So I Googled his name, and he was, in 1967, he was doing psychic surgeries in Mexico. okay, Mexico City. And they were trying to stop him. The authorities of the United States were trying to prevent tour groups from going down there.
Oh.
Now, I was in the Philippines, and I had heard about him in the Philippines, that he had paid a bunch of money to learn how to do psychic surgeries, and they had showed him that it was totally sleight of hand. That's what I have been told. The world that I work in is a folklore world, and I hear stories and I write them down, and so I remember writing down that story. But I think that was pretty common knowledge, that he had been taught the sleight of hand tricks, and so that's what he was doing.
Well, it's been so long. It's been probably since the early 1970s since I ever interacted with him. But my recollection is that he did not believe it was trickery, that he was under the belief, and he had formed a whole community of people around him who felt it was quite sincere. And
well, then he's just like the psychic surgeons, isn't he?
Yeah, I guess so. Now, but may I probe you a little more deeply on this? I know you don't deny the possibility of psychokinesis. You just feel that in this instance there was no evidence for it.
Well, I expected that there would be phenomena. I had experienced phenomena with the Surats, with this entity letter book which I had written. I had experienced the phenomena, and I wanted to experience the phenomena so that I could learn about it. I wanted to learn as much as I could about it. So I spent a lot of time. I watched over 1,000 of these operations, and at not a single case did I see any phenomena that would make me have the slightest thought that there was anything with.
But at one point,
But I heard a lot of stories. People told me a lot of stories, and the healers told me a lot of stories. But they fall into the category of apparitions, waking extrasensory perception, paranormal dreams, out-of-body experience, psychokinesis, spiritual healing. Those stories all fall into the category of spontaneous personal experiences. You see, so I think that that's where the core of authenticity is. Now, it's possible that a performance, for example, the Surats put their hands on the table. It seems as if sometimes there's paranormal phenomena. But if you expect it to occur on demand, you pay your money and you expect to see it, it isn't going to happen.
I would agree with you about that.
If you know what to look for, you see, and that's the problem, is that I knew what to look for. Now, for example, I was misled really by my interaction with James Randi, because I thought that I understood paranormal metal bending, So when I saw it there in Japan, Uri Geller came to Japan, and I was there and watched him with a newspaper reporter, and I had told the reporter that I felt I could duplicate everything that he did. Okay, well, he had the reporter come up, he had the reporter hold the spoon in his hand, and then he just kind of waved his hand around it, and then the spoon became elastic, that he had not touched it. And the reporter said, "Well, can you do that?" And I said, "No, I can't. I can't do that." And we could check the spoon; it had not been tampered with. So yes, it's to my mind, it's clear that things are, it's possible for PK. Here, let me show you a trick. Okay. Here's the trick. Okay, let's see if I can get this. I can't see myself very clearly in that image.
Yeah. Okay, your hands. You're going to remove your thumb. I can see.
My thumb is alive. You see, it's alive now.
Right.
I'm gonna. You see it? Now.
Yeah.
Oh, it's painful. Oh. And if I could get some blood to come out, you see, the blood comes out.
If you could get some blood to come out, it might be impressive. But let me ask you this question.
Put your finger in the person's body, and there's stories. People say that they put their hand into the incision,
In your book, you refer to some of the psychic healers as having very fluid, subtle movements, even better, you thought, than the James Randi and the other magicians who were trying to fake. Yeah.
Much better, yeah. Their movements were much better, but they all of them had repetitive motions. They had different tricks that they had mastered, that they were very skillful at doing. And it requires you to load up your hand with the chicken guts or something else, and then to extract it. And you could see how they would wipe their hands on a towel that allowed them to load it up, or they'd bring their hand and the hand would pass over or touch the towel or touch an object, or the hand would disappear from your view, and you could see how that in every instant. Now, if you look at some of Stanley Krippner's work, a book that he wrote about healing, he mentions a lot of cases which are kind of like apparitional events, and they're shared apparitions. Okay, so I had hoped that I would see something like that within the context of this. I would hope that I might have a spontaneous experience, but I did not.
Yeah. You, in other words, you went into your exploration hoping to find some sort of really legitimate, amazing paranormal phenomenon, and what you encountered in your mind was 100% trickery.
Well, let me tell another story. Okay. I decided, I talked to people who are hanging around psychic surgeons. There's special churches that do this kind of thing, and it's not that psychic surgery is not the core, or it's not the center of the whole phenomenon. I think it's like a kind of a sorcery, and it's a problem for some people. Someone has put a curse on you, and you need to get that curse off. And the psychic surgeon removes a diseased part of your body, but if you have a curse on you, you need
something black and ugly needs to come out.
And that's the indigenous culture. And there's a place that's the center of it, Sekihor Island in the Philippines. And so I went down there, and there's bula-bulas down there who do the sleight of hand surgery. And then there's also Manum, let's see if I can pronounce it right, Manumbula or something like that, a special practitioner. And there's a lot of them down there. And people come down there from all over the Philippines, and they spend like a month down there, and they do rituals to help them. And so a lot of these guys have the same kind of call, men and women have the same kind of calling, and the spirit helps them. The spirit's helping them to find the right herbs. The spirit's helping them to do the ceremony on the right day, like Good Friday. And there's a lot of magical performance going on. And a judge told me that I should talk to a particular healer, that he had been cursed, and this healer had removed the curse. And his life had been just a nightmare. He had been diagnosed with cancer, and he was going to die soon. And this healer had fixed him up, and he was okay. Right? So I must talk to this particular healer. So I went to where the woman lived, and she invited me in, and she was very, very poor and sick herself. And she had dreams to do certain things, and she had done the things. She had interacted with the judge and a lot of other people. A lot of people had been helped, but now the phenomena is gone. And no one's coming. So there's another side. The thing isn't something that you control. And and I've collected so many stories. I can't help but think there's something's going on, and it's going on in all the countries of the world. And I'm sure there's people who are listening to this who have had many, many experiences, and they're a part of it too. We're all part of this process.
Well, in your book, Wondrous Healing, you talk about the notion that it's miraculous events, or seemingly miraculous events like this, that are really the origin of religious belief.
Yes, the people. Okay, so when I came back from Asia in 1986, then I started. I was at the University of Maryland, and I conducted a survey. I was looking at all these notes, and it seemed like the common feature were these spontaneous experiences. The spontaneous experiences were compelling people to believe, and I was reading David Hufford's book, The Terror That Comes in the Night. He's a folklorist. And so I started doing a kind of folklore research where I was just kind of be collecting stories. I collected over 1,000 stories. And it was interesting. Some people have these experiences, and then people started coming to me. Some people have many experiences.
Mm-hmm.
I remember one woman came to me and she had had a dream that had come true. She knew that her uncle was going to die, and then he died in exactly the way as in her dream, precognitive dreams.
Yeah.
And she'd had spontaneous healing experiences, and probably about 6 or 7 different experiences. And so for her, this wasn't an academic topic. This was her life.
Mm-hmm.
And so she was coming to me saying, "What's going on?" And so I pointed to all this. Here I have got notebook after notebook, page after page. These stories.
Yeah.
And she said, "Yeah, that's my life."
Mm-hmm.
And what is it? And she said, it's because of Jesus. She was a Christian.
Yeah.
And this is part of her. The people in her church are somewhat skeptical. They can't believe to the same level as she's believing.
Mm-hmm.
But the spirits, it seems to foster a belief in spirits, souls, life after death, and magical abilities. And that seems to be a universal feature. Now, it varies from place to place, and the interpretation varies, and the nature of the soul, the nature of life after death varies from culture to culture. But that seems to be the experiences, these spontaneous experiences compel the people to be healers.
Mm-hmm.
They put on a show. Like last week we talked about firewalking. So I was on that process. I became a firewalker.
Yeah.
And maybe it's kind of a trick. I mean, you've got to walk quickly. You got to walk. Mm-hmm. It's an athletic event. But you're doing something that most people can't do.
Did you ever endeavor to become a psychic surgeon?
No, because I can pull my thumb off, right? No, but I endeavored to become a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And I took training as a social worker, and I went to work in a psychiatric hospital.
Yeah.
And I meditated every day for all of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something to be learned, and that has to do with compassion. Has to do with spontaneity, mm-hmm. compassion, and humility.
Mm-hmm.
And the recognition that it's not you. You're not healing anyone.
Mm-hmm.
I don't proclaim myself to be a healer, but I know that the healing. Mm-hmm. I know the healing occurs. I think the people who are listening to this should think about it. Like what are we saying to them? I think we're saying that the psychokinesis or the psi is real, but it has a hiding quality, and if you look for it, if you use your scrutiny to try to find it, you won't. And they've done research with these psychic surgeons to try and check to make sure they're not bringing anything in.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work out.
I'm not aware of any really good studies about that. There are occasional reports in the literature that talk about before and after X-rays, but not.
Well,
go ahead.
Yeah, well, there's before the doctors diagnose the cancer, they have X-rays or whatever, they find the cancer, the people come back and it's gone.
Mm-hmm.
So here, you and I are here, and all these people are watching this videotape. What you would like to have that happen to you. You would like to have. It reminds me of a poem that goes something like this: the camel looked at the needle and saw that the needle's eye was so very small, and the camel meditated and fasted and prayed and leaped through space and time and flew through the eye of the needle. And the camel said, the miracle is not that it can happen, but that it happened to me. So the potential shaman is experiencing the terrible malady and the suffering, and and comes across a solution, and the solution is to become a healer, to become so empty of yourself that you can do this kind of thing. And so I think so there is a question. It's an interaction of something deep inside yourself. And within our Western orientation, we have this cognitive behavioral therapy, where you look at your own mind, you look at your own thoughts, and you recognize the errors in your own thinking, and you try to correct it.
Yeah.
So there's probably people that are listening to us, and maybe they're suffering from depression or anxiety. You might just Google cognitive behavioral therapy and practice relaxing yourself and doing a kind of self-hypnosis and figuring out what the flaws in your own thinking and what you might do about it, and perhaps seeking a higher power.
Well, in other words, you subscribe to a variety of psychospiritual approaches to healing, including the placebo effect, hypnosis, cognitive behavior therapy, meditation. But where I see you drawing the line is for healers who are charging sums of money, who claim to be able to produce magical psychokinetic effects on demand.
Well, actually, let's see. Here's what I think. Well, here, let me just talk to you, because you're in front of me right now.
Yeah.
What do you believe?
Well,
I would like to work. If you have a problem, I would like to work with your beliefs.
Yeah.
And then I would like to apply your beliefs to solve that problem. You see what I'm saying? So the people are listening to us, and I would like to ask them, what's your belief? And then let's think about how you could use that. Now, we're Westerners, and so you get on an airplane and fly way off to the Philippines. Maybe you should just look inside yourself, because there's a tendency to think that the foreigner, the exotic person, they're going to do the magical thing and that cure you. And some people are cured. But
well, people who are viewers of this channel will, for example, be able to view the interview with Elizabeth Rauscher, a physicist who did studies on distant healing with Ogle Worrell, an American healer now deceased, who was able to influence the growth of bacteria from a distance.
Well, I visited her, yes, and interviewed her, yes. She's quite an interesting person, and she surrounds herself with other healers who are also very interesting people, too, yeah. And so I brought some people to be healed by her, and I can't say that any miracles occurred, but I think we'd have that placebo healing and hypnotic suggestion. And it's far more powerful than you might think. There's some research that indicates that all antidepressants may be effective as a result of the placebo effect.
And that's quite interesting.
Yeah, there's a distinct possibility, because the mechanisms which they thought were explaining that effectiveness turn out not to be valid.
Well,
some people argue that that's not valid. So I don't know.
The placebo effect, to me, as far as I know, the literature, it's one of the strongest, most consistent effects in all of medicine.
So the question is, a person, say you have a drinking problem, and you'd like to stop drinking. And you say, well, I'm not going to drink today. And then by the time the sun sets, you're drinking anyway. We need something pretty powerful for that, And so that's where you're going to have to reach inside yourself to look, what is it that you believe and what might work in that area to create that powerful effect. I remember being in Sri Lanka one time, and I had was investigating a particular healer. This guy was running healing sessions every week at his compound. He's a school teacher. And so I went and visited him in a very, very rural backcountry place in Sri Lanka. And he invited me in, and he wanted me to sleep in his pyramid. He put this huge pyramid in his backyard, and he had this huge library of Western books which he had read, all the New Age this and New Age that, spiritual healing, He had me sleep in the pyramid, and the mosquitoes were just terrible, terrible. It was like a terrible nightmare for me, And then the next morning, he did this kind of show for the people. He had a medium. The medium went into trance. The medium put a blindfold on, and the people wrote out their problems on a piece of paper. And then the medium did what I saw was very clearly. She peeked down the side of the blindfold, and she could see. Really pretended like she was answering each one's problem, while she was in trance. And to me, it was a big hoax. And then they had the whole audience kind of go into trance, and they gave a suggestion that they would be able to respond, and they'd be able to answer. The spirit had told them what each one should do. And so this is all just such fraudulent, such a big fake.
Yeah.
And it's just so difficult. And the mosquitoes I had all kinds of bites on me, and it was really, really hot, and difficult, and just so fraudulent. And then he showed me 10,000. He had sent out questionnaires and asked the people how they had done. And 10,000 people had sent him letters, and so many thousand people had been cured of their alcohol and addiction problems, and of all these anxiety disorders and depression, and wonderful, wonderful healing. And I had worked, years and years later, I worked in a psychiatric hospital. We can't do that, We don't have an effective cure for alcoholism, and yet he did.
Because of the cultural setting, I presume.
And the amazing, the magic, it just seemed so real. The medium was powerful.
Yeah.
And she could tell what you were thinking, without it. Well, there's no way she could have seen the paper. She had a blindfold on, It's amazing.
Very interesting. Well, how do you evaluate, or do you evaluate the many now parapsychological double-blind studies of healing?
Well, that's very wonderful. But if you'll notice reading through it, exactly what kind of benefit are people getting from those double-blind studies? They're having very, very small effect size. And yes, you might prove it, but it's not really a replicable experiment. It's the same with all parapsychology. We're not really at the heart of what's really going on.
Well, I think a lot of parapsychologists would disagree with you about that, Jim.
You're doing things in the library. You're doing things in a laboratory.
Yeah.
Now, for example, this case that you investigated, your guy was influencing the weather.
Oh, okay, yes, Ted Owens.
PK man.
Yeah, the PK man. Yes, so
you're dealing with a very powerful phenomena.
Yeah.
That's not the laboratory.
No, it's not a laboratory, and of course, healing studies. Some of them are done in hospitals.
I don't know of anything that's really very replicable that's been done.
I see.
My understanding is, and I've done studies. I've taken part in studies like that. Here's what's replicable in the prayer studies. If you pray for someone, you'll benefit from that. That's something that you think about. That
okay.
If you forgive someone, you'll benefit from that, and your health will be improved. So I think, say you do a prayer study, I think you find that maybe the person will be helped by being prayed for.
Yeah.
But the person praying will be helped. Will benefit from it.
Oh, well, that's interesting. And of course, people say the same thing about forgiveness. Forgiving is for the forgiver, not for the person who's being forgiven.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of truth to that.
So, and I gathered all these cases, magical things happen, and we look through it. You don't find, the question is there really a direct benefit from, say, having a precognitive dream or an extrasensory perception experience? Is there some kind of evolutionary impact from it? And you look at the stories, generally people have negative experiences. There's a lot of fear involved, and negative emotions that surround this kind of thing. There's the reward, the benefit isn't very great, actually.
I guess it certainly depends on who you talk to, but
We're talking to regular folks.
Yeah. You've obviously looked into this. You've observed 1,000 of these surgeries. So you have a database of your own. I'm really referring here to, I think there's, even in the last 10, 20 years, and I don't know if you've kept up with that literature, many published studies now, double-blind studies with healers.
Well, if you're a psi-conducive researcher, then you can do that.
Yeah.
You see. But if you're not a psi-reducive researcher, then you don't. Now, let me look inside my own heart, okay? Mm-hmm. So, I looked at 1,000. Maybe I'm not that psi-conducive. You see, wouldn't you think?
Well,
at least in those days.
Obviously, as a sociologist, you're probably aware that, whatever your mindset is going to affect what you observe.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I had that attitude and that propensity.
Yeah.
So I didn't see anything.
Yeah.
I had hoped.
Yes, you do certainly strike me as an open-minded person.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe it took a few more decades of meditation.
Uh-huh. One or the other.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, when we have healing studies with bacteria, with plants, with mice, you can't attribute those healings to a psychological effect from hypnosis or a placebo effect.
Well, I'm right now. I'm looking at the data from my sitter group research to see who has the kinds of experience, who has the PK experiences. It's pretty clear that some people have a propensity for this and other people don't.
Yeah. And
some people are psi-conducive and others aren't. So I think a psi-conducive experimenters, they're going to get results.
Mm-hmm.
And they develop good track records.
Yeah.
But I think there is a trickster phenomena. I think the parapsychologists claim that they have replicable research, but that's the claim they made when I was in my 20s and 30s. Here I'm a 70-year-old guy.
Yeah.
A lot of years have gone by.
Sure.
Parapsychology has not.
Those claims were being made before you and I were born by J.B. Rhine back in the 1930s. My impression is that actually the research has become more and more rigorous and more successful, but people will dispute that.
Well, more successful, I just came from the Parapsychological Association meeting this last summer, and there were no successful, real carefully controlled experiments. There is no evidence attaining real high levels of success. In the 1980s, there were those meetings. I saw every year. I would see cases of high, but I don't wish to adopt the role of the skeptic. I mean, I can go both ways on this.
Yeah.
I think that the question is for you and I, and where to watch your own thoughts and your own mind to figure out the pathway to success, and so that you can help others to go that pathway.
Well, Jim,
so in this particular presentation, we talked about psychic surgery, and that wasn't my pathway. I got one more quick story. Maybe you can edit it down. Okay, so I had a chance to talk to a lot of people, and this one woman wanted me to tell me her story, and she had some terrible stomach disorder, and she had been to Ogle that hadn't worked. She'd been to other healers that hadn't worked. She'd been to some kind of Pentecostal healer, and that hadn't worked. And she had been really, really angry that nothing was helping her. And then she had just been reading the Bible one evening, and this powerful spiritual force just overwhelmed her, and she had felt a terrible or burning sensation all through her body, and she felt maybe something was wrong with her, and she went back to the doctor the next day, and her problem had gone away.
Instantly, in other words.
Instantly, yeah. And so she wanted to express this deep anger because she had spent all this money and gone to see all these other people, and it hadn't helped her. But I think it's a matter. It's kind of like a lock and a key, and a person is seeking to make the lock fit in one key, the key fit in one lock, and it doesn't work in another lock. And so each of us, perhaps we need to find our own lock that fit our key, and that's the way. And maybe you don't need to seek outside yourself.
Well, that's a very interesting story and a good point to end on, Jim. Thank you so much for sharing the depth of your experience, and I suppose it really should be a note of caution, maybe even a note of warning for people who have various illnesses and are thinking of getting them treated from some sort of a miracle healer.
Well, I wouldn't discourage it, certainly, if it's going to have a positive, if it's going to lead to a positive attitude. A lot of times people who have terminal illnesses, if they hang out with spiritually oriented people, they can come to a realization that maybe death is not such a bad thing after all. There's also that possibility.
Yeah. Well, James McClenon, I've very much enjoyed our conversation, and I know that we have yet to mine all of the things that you've already written about, so I hope we can do this again.
Yeah, I'm sure we will. I hope we will.
Okay. Thank you for being with me.
Thank you.